The rise of Adolf Hitler remains one of the most disturbing and consequential political transformations in modern history. When viewed through the rare and striking lens of restored color footage, the world of Nazi Germany becomes unnervingly vivid. The grainy black and white imagery that once created emotional distance is replaced by faces flushed with fanatic devotion, banners blazing in crimson and black, and uniforms shimmering beneath the harsh light of propaganda spectacle. Through color, history ceases to feel distant. It feels immediate, human, and terrifyingly real. This is the story of the man who reshaped Germany, ignited a global catastrophe, and constructed one of history's most brutal regimes. This is the story of the dictator who called himself the Führer. Adolf Hitler's origins offered little hint of the destructive force he would eventually become. Born on April 20, 1889, in the small Austrian border town of Braunau am Inn, Hitler grew up in a modest household marked by tension and instability. His father, Adolf Hitler, was a strict and authoritarian customs official, while his mother, Clara, was deeply devoted to her son. Hitler later described his childhood with conflicting emotions, portraying himself as misunderstood and destined for greatness. Yet those who knew him in his youth often described a withdrawn, stubborn, and intensely imaginative boy. From an early age, Hitler developed grand fantasies about art, architecture, and German nationalism. These interests would later merge with dangerous ideological obsessions. Hitler's adolescence in Linz shaped much of his developing worldview. He struggled academically and clashed frequently with authority figures. His dreams of becoming a professional artist consumed him, leading him to move to Vienna in 1907. Vienna was a cultural capital filled with artistic innovation, but it was also a city steeped in political tension and widespread anti-Semitism. Hitler's repeated rejection from the prestigious Vienna Academy of Fine Arts proved devastating. Forced into poverty, he spent years living in men's hostels, surviving by selling amateur paintings and postcards. During this period, historians believe Hitler absorbed radical nationalist and racial ideas that were widespread in Viennese political circles. His writings from later years suggest that his hatred toward Jews and his belief in racial hierarchy hardened during this time. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 offered Hitler a new sense of purpose. He volunteered for service in the German army, despite being Austrian by birth, and was assigned as a dispatch runner on the Western Front. Hitler proved brave and disciplined, earning the Iron Cross for his service, yet the brutal trench warfare deeply scarred him psychologically. Like many soldiers, he experienced the horrors of modern industrialized conflict, endless artillery bombardments, poison gas attacks, and staggering casualties. When Germany surrendered in November 1918, Hitler was recovering from a gas attack in a military hospital. The defeat shattered him. He embraced the widespread conspiracy theory known as the stab-in-the-back myth, which falsely claimed that Germany had not been defeated militarily but betrayed by internal enemies, including Jews, socialists, and political leaders. This belief became the cornerstone of Hitler's ideology. Germany's post-war collapse created fertile ground for extremism. The Treaty of Versailles imposed crippling reparations, territorial losses, and strict military limitations on Germany. Economic instability, mass unemployment, and national humiliation fueled public anger. In this chaotic environment, Hitler found his calling not as an artist, but as a political agitator. In 1919, he joined the small and obscure German Workers' Party. His natural talent for public speaking quickly became apparent. Hitler possessed an extraordinary ability to manipulate emotion. Witnesses described his speeches as theatrical performances, beginning quietly before building into explosive, hypnotic crescendos. Within a short time, Hitler transformed the party into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. Color footage from early Nazi rallies reveals the careful construction of political theater. Rows of uniformed supporters stood beneath towering banners, while orchestrated lighting and music created an atmosphere of ritual and unity. Hitler understood the power of imagery and symbolism better than most political figures of his time. The swastika, an ancient symbol repurposed into a representation of racial purity and national rebirth, became the central emblem of the Nazi movement. Through spectacle and propaganda, Hitler presented himself not merely as a politician, but as a messianic figure destined to restore Germany's greatness. In November 1923, Hitler attempted to seize power through force in an event known as the Beer Hall Putsch. Inspired by Benito Mussolini's successful march on Rome, Hitler and his supporters tried to overthrow the Bavarian government in Munich. The coup failed disastrously. Police opened fire, killing several Nazis, and Hitler was arrested. Yet this failure proved to be a turning point. During his trial, Hitler used the courtroom as a national stage, delivering lengthy speeches that gained him widespread publicity. Sentenced to prison, he served less than a year in relatively comfortable conditions at Landsberg prison. It was here that Hitler dictated his ideological manifesto, Mein Kampf, outlining his vision of racial hierarchy, territorial expansion, and absolute dictatorship. Mein Kampf revealed Hitler's long-term goals with chilling clarity. He believed Germany required Lebensraum, or living space, which could only be achieved through expansion into Eastern Europe. He envisioned a racially pure German empire and called for the destruction of Jews, whom he blamed for Germany's problems. At the time, many dismissed these ideas as extremist rhetoric. Few recognized that Hitler was outlining a blueprint for future genocide and global war. The late 1920s brought new opportunities for Hitler. The global Great Depression devastated Germany's fragile economy. Millions lost their jobs, banks collapsed, and political chaos intensified. Hitler exploited public desperation by presenting himself as Germany's savior. Nazi propaganda portrayed him as a strong leader who would restore order, rebuild the economy, and protect German identity. Colorized footage of campaign events shows vast crowds gathering to hear him speak, their faces illuminated by torchlight as they chanted his name in unison. The emotional intensity of these rallies created a sense of belonging that many Germans found irresistible during uncertain times. By 1932, the Nazi Party had become Germany's largest political party. Political deadlock paralyzed the government, and conservative elites believed they could control Hitler by appointing him as chancellor. On January 30, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. Many believed his power would be limited. They were disastrously mistaken. Hitler moved swiftly to dismantle democracy. In February 1933, the Reichstag building burned under mysterious circumstances. Hitler used the crisis to declare a state of emergency, suspending civil liberties and allowing mass arrests of political opponents. The following month, the Enabling Act granted Hitler the authority to pass laws without parliamentary approval. Germany's democratic institutions collapsed almost overnight. Opposition parties were banned, trade unions dissolved, and political dissent crushed. Hitler had transformed himself from chancellor into absolute dictator. The creation of the Gestapo and the expansion of the SS cemented Nazi control. These organizations enforced ideological loyalty through surveillance, intimidation, and terror. Concentration camps, originally established to imprison political opponents, soon became tools of systematic repression. Color footage from this period shows orderly public life in German cities, masking the brutal machinery of persecution operating behind the scenes. The illusion of stability was central to Nazi propaganda, convincing many citizens that Hitler had restored order and national pride. Central to Hitler's rule was the cult of personality constructed around him. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels orchestrated an unprecedented media campaign that portrayed Hitler as Germany's heroic redeemer. Posters, films, radio broadcasts, and newsreels flooded the nation with carefully crafted imagery. In color film sequences, Hitler appears surrounded by cheering crowds, children presenting flowers and soldiers pledging loyalty. These images created an emotional connection between dictator and population, reinforcing the idea that Hitler embodied the will of the German people. The Nuremberg rallies became the ultimate expression of Nazi spectacle. Tens of thousands of uniformed participants marched in perfect formation beneath enormous floodlights. Architect Albert Speer designed the events to resemble sacred rituals rather than political gatherings. The overwhelming visual power of these rallies was designed to erase individuality and replace it with collective obedience. Color restoration reveals the chilling precision of these events, highlighting the vibrant red banners and gleaming black uniforms that symbolized the regime's militarized ideology. Yet behind the pageantry lay escalating persecution. Hitler's regime systematically targeted Jews, political dissidents, disabled individuals, and other groups deemed undesirable. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 stripped Jews of citizenship and banned intermarriage between Jews and Germans. These laws marked a major step toward the racial state Hitler envisioned. Color footage from everyday German life during this period reveals how quickly discrimination became normalized, as Jewish businesses were boycotted and families were ostracized from society. Hitler's economic policies initially boosted his popularity. Massive public works projects, including the construction of the Autobahn highway network, reduced unemployment and revitalized infrastructure. Military rearmament secretly violated the Treaty of Versailles but stimulated industrial growth. Many Germans experienced improved living standards, reinforcing their support for Hitler. Color propaganda films depicted smiling workers, thriving factories, and a rejuvenated nation marching confidently into the future. By the late 1930s, Hitler's ambitions expanded beyond Germany's borders. He sought to unite all ethnic Germans under Nazi rule and expand territory eastward. In 1938, Hitler annexed Austria in an event known as the Anschluss. Color footage captures jubilant crowds welcoming German troops, illustrating the initial enthusiasm that accompanied Nazi expansion. Later that year, Hitler demanded control of the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. European leaders, desperate to avoid war, conceded at the Munich Agreement. The policy of appeasement temporarily satisfied Hitler but emboldened his ambitions further. As Hitler consolidated power, his personality grew increasingly unpredictable and authoritarian. Those closest to him described sudden mood swings, obsessive routines, and an intense belief in his own historical destiny. He viewed himself as a visionary leader guided by fate. Color home movies taken by Nazi officials sometimes show Hitler in private settings, laughing with associates or interacting with children, revealing a carefully managed public persona that masked the violent ideology driving his regime. By 1939, Hitler stood at the height of his power. Germany had transformed from a defeated nation into a militarized dictatorship preparing for expansion. Hitler believed he was reshaping history itself. The dictator who once struggled as a failed artist now commanded one of the most powerful war machines in the world. Yet his ambitions would soon plunge humanity into its deadliest conflict. The story of Adolf Hitler is not merely a tale of one man's rise to power. It is a warning about how fear, propaganda, and economic instability can transform societies. Color footage strips away the distance of time, forcing viewers to confront the reality that ordinary people lived, celebrated, and followed a regime built upon hatred and violence. As the Third Reich expanded, the world moved closer to catastrophe, and the consequences of Hitler's rule would soon become horrifyingly clear. Part 1 reveals the transformation of Adolf Hitler from obscure agitator to absolute dictator. In the next chapter, the story will explore how Hitler's regime reshaped German society and prepared the nation for total war, revealing the machinery of power that sustained the Third Reich and set the stage for global destruction. The consolidation of Adolf Hitler's power did not happen solely through political maneuvering or legal manipulation. It relied heavily on transforming German society itself, reshaping culture, education, media, and everyday life into instruments of ideological control. Once Hitler secured absolute authority, the Nazi regime began constructing what it called the Volksgemeinschaft, the people's community. This concept promised unity, strength, and national rebirth. In reality, it demanded total conformity and unconditional loyalty to the Führer. Color footage from the mid-1930s captures a Germany that appeared vibrant, organized, and confident. Streets were filled with banners bearing the swastika. Children marched in uniformed youth organizations. Parades and celebrations became routine displays of national pride. Yet beneath this carefully choreographed facade, the regime was systematically dismantling individuality. Every aspect of life was expected to reflect Nazi ideology. Education became one of the regime's most powerful tools. Schools were redesigned to produce loyal followers rather than independent thinkers. Textbooks were rewritten to emphasize racial theories, German superiority, and obedience to authority. Teachers were required to join the National Socialist Teachers League and swear loyalty to Hitler. Students were taught that their highest duty was to serve the state. Science classes promoted pseudoscientific racial biology, while history lessons glorified Germany's past military victories and portrayed Jews and political enemies as threats to national survival. Outside the classroom, the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls played central roles in shaping young minds. Membership in these organizations gradually became compulsory. Boys were trained in military drills, survival skills, and physical endurance, preparing them for future service in the armed forces. Girls were instructed in domestic responsibilities and motherhood, reflecting Nazi beliefs about gender roles. Color home movies show smiling children singing patriotic songs, camping in forests, and participating in athletic competitions. These scenes projected innocence and joy, masking the deeper indoctrination taking place. Hitler understood that controlling youth meant securing the future of the regime. By shaping the beliefs of children, the Nazis sought to create generations who would accept authoritarian rule without question. Many parents supported these organizations, believing they offered structure and opportunity. Others feared consequences if they resisted. Gradually, loyalty to family traditions was replaced by loyalty to the state. The Nazi regime also sought to control leisure and entertainment. The Strength Through Joy program, known as Kraft durch Freude, organized affordable vacations, concerts, and sporting events for German workers. The initiative aimed to demonstrate that the Nazi government cared for ordinary citizens while simultaneously promoting ideological unity. Color propaganda films from seaside resorts and cruise ships show workers relaxing and enjoying activities that had previously been reserved for the wealthy. The message was clear. Under Hitler, Germany was becoming stronger, happier, and more united. Art and culture underwent dramatic transformation as well. The Nazis rejected modernist art, labeling it degenerate. Works that challenged traditional values or reflected abstract styles were removed from museums. Instead, Nazi-approved art emphasized heroic soldiers, idealized rural life, and physically perfect Aryan bodies. Architecture followed similar principles. Massive stone buildings, monumental statues, and grand public spaces were designed to symbolize permanence and power. Hitler, who still carried ambitions of being an architect, took personal interest in many of these projects. One of the most symbolic cultural events of Nazi Germany was the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. The regime saw the Olympics as an opportunity to present Germany as peaceful, advanced, and welcoming to the international community. Color footage from the Games reveals a carefully sanitized version of Nazi Germany. Anti-Jewish signs temporarily disappeared, and foreign visitors were treated with elaborate hospitality. The Olympic Stadium, decorated with Nazi banners and surrounded by massive architecture, became a stage for propaganda on a global scale. Athletic triumphs were portrayed as proof of Aryan superiority, yet the Games also produced unexpected challenges to Nazi racial ideology. African-American athlete Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals, becoming one of the most celebrated figures of the Olympics. His victories contradicted Nazi claims of racial hierarchy, though German propaganda attempted to minimize their significance. For a brief moment, the world saw cracks in the carefully constructed image of Nazi superiority, while the regime projected strength and unity. Internal repression intensified. Political opposition had largely been eliminated by the mid-1930s, but the Nazis continued targeting groups they considered dangerous or undesirable. Homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Roma communities, and people with disabilities faced increasing persecution. The regime introduced programs aimed at forced sterilization of individuals deemed genetically unfit. These policies were justified using distorted interpretations of science and social Darwinism. The expansion of concentration camps reflected the growing brutality of the regime. Camps such as Dachau, originally established for political prisoners, expanded in size and purpose. Colorized images from official Nazi inspections often showed clean facilities and orderly routines, hiding the violence and abuse inflicted upon prisoners. Survivors later described brutal labor conditions, starvation, and relentless psychological torment. The camps served not only as prisons, but as instruments of fear, warning citizens of the consequences of dissent. As Hitler strengthened his control domestically, he simultaneously pursued aggressive foreign policy objectives. He viewed the Treaty of Versailles as an unjust humiliation and sought to rebuild Germany's military strength. Rearmament programs expanded rapidly, often disguised as civilian projects. The Luftwaffe Air Force was secretly developed, while conscription reintroduced mandatory military service. Color footage from military parades shows soldiers marching in immaculate formation, their uniforms gleaming beneath banners and searchlights. These displays reinforced national pride while signaling Germany's growing power. Hitler's foreign policy relied on calculated risk-taking. In 1936, German troops marched into the demilitarized Rhineland, directly violating the Treaty of Versailles. The move was extraordinarily dangerous, as German forces had orders to retreat if confronted by French or British armies. Yet no opposition came. The successful gamble boosted Hitler's confidence and increased his popularity within Germany. Many citizens viewed the remilitarization as a restoration of national sovereignty. The relationship between Hitler and the German military remained complex. Many traditional military leaders initially viewed him with skepticism, seeing him as a radical outsider. However, Hitler gradually gained their loyalty by promoting expansionist goals and providing massive resources for rearmament. He also removed potential rivals through purges, ensuring that opposition within the military hierarchy remained limited. Meanwhile, propaganda continued shaping public perception. Joseph Goebbels expanded the reach of Nazi messaging through film, radio, and mass rallies. Cheap radio receivers, known as Volksempfänger, were distributed widely to ensure that Hitler's speeches reached millions of households. Families gathered around radios to hear the Führer speak, his voice carried into living rooms across the nation. Color footage of families listening attentively illustrates how propaganda blurred the line between public and private life. Cinema became one of the most influential propaganda tools. Filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl produced visually stunning films such as Triumph of the Will, which documented the Nuremberg rallies. Her films used innovative camera techniques, dramatic lighting, and carefully choreographed scenes to portray Hitler as a heroic, almost divine figure. The visual power of these films left lasting impressions on audiences and demonstrated the regime's mastery of psychological manipulation. By the late 1930s, Hitler's ambitions grew increasingly radical. The persecution of Jews intensified through economic exclusion and social isolation. Jewish professionals lost their jobs, businesses were confiscated, and families faced constant harassment. The situation escalated dramatically during the event known as Kristallnacht in November 1938. Nazi-organized mobs destroyed Jewish synagogues, looted businesses, and attacked Jewish homes across Germany and Austria. Color photographs from the aftermath reveal shattered glass covering streets, burned buildings, and terrified families standing amid the ruins of their communities. Kristallnacht marked a decisive shift from discrimination to open violence. Thousands of Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. The international response was largely limited to diplomatic condemnation, reinforcing Hitler's belief that foreign powers would not intervene decisively against his policies. Within Germany, fear silenced many who might otherwise have spoken out. Despite growing persecution, Hitler remained widely popular among large segments of the German population. Economic recovery, territorial expansion, and national pride contributed to his support. Color home movies show ordinary families celebrating holidays, attending festivals, and participating in public ceremonies. These glimpses of daily life reveal how normalcy coexisted with oppression. Many Germans either supported the regime, benefited from its policies, or chose to ignore its crimes. Hitler's personal leadership style further strengthened his authority. He avoided routine administrative work, instead relying on subordinates to interpret his broad directives. This created a chaotic but fiercely competitive government structure in which officials attempted to anticipate Hitler's desires. The system, known as working toward the Führer, encouraged increasingly radical policies as officials sought to prove loyalty. By early 1939, Hitler had already absorbed Austria and dismantled Czechoslovakia. These actions violated international agreements but were achieved with minimal resistance. Hitler interpreted this lack of opposition as confirmation that his expansionist strategy would succeed. He now turned his attention to Poland, a nation he viewed as a critical step toward achieving Lebensraum in Eastern Europe. As diplomatic tensions escalated, Hitler pursued one of the most shocking agreements of the era. In August 1939, Nazi Germany signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, despite their ideological hostility. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, clearing the path for Germany's invasion of Poland. The agreement stunned the world and demonstrated Hitler's willingness to make temporary alliances to achieve strategic goals. Color footage from the final months before war shows Germany preparing for conflict while maintaining an appearance of normal life. Soldiers trained in newly expanded barracks. Factories increased production of weapons and vehicles. Public rallies continued to celebrate German strength and unity. Many citizens believed Hitler's promises that Germany sought only peace and security. Few understood that Europe stood on the brink of unprecedented destruction. As summer turned to autumn in 1939, Hitler finalized plans that would trigger World War II. On September 1, German forces invaded Poland using a new form of warfare known as blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Tanks, aircraft, and mechanized infantry moved with devastating speed, overwhelming Polish defenses. Within days, Europe was plunged into conflict. Britain and France declared war on Germany, transforming regional aggression into global catastrophe. The dictator who had once promised national revival now led Germany into a war that would reshape human history. Through colorized footage, the early victories of the Third Reich appear both triumphant and ominous. Crowds celebrated returning soldiers, unaware that the war would soon consume continents and cost tens of millions of lives. Part 1 of this documentary reveals the rise of Adolf Hitler and the creation of the Nazi state. It explores how propaganda, fear, and ambition transformed Germany into a dictatorship prepared for total war. The story of the dictator is not only about power, but about the fragile nature of democracy and the dangers of unchecked authority. As German forces surged across Poland in September 1939, the world witnessed the terrifying effectiveness of Hitler's military revolution. Blitzkrieg combined overwhelming air power, fast-moving armored divisions, and highly coordinated infantry assaults. The speed of the invasion shocked military strategists across Europe. Polish defenses collapsed within weeks, and the country was divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, as secretly agreed in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Color footage from German military cameramen shows columns of tanks rolling through devastated towns, soldiers advancing through smoke-filled battlefields, and triumphant parades staged shortly after occupation. These images, designed as propaganda, concealed the brutality unfolding behind the front lines. The invasion of Poland marked the beginning of systematic violence against civilians. Nazi security units known as Einsatzgruppen followed the advancing army, carrying out mass arrests and executions of political leaders, intellectuals, and Jewish communities. Entire villages were terrorized, and thousands were murdered in the earliest stages of Nazi occupation. Hitler viewed Poland not simply as conquered territory, but as a testing ground for his racial policies. The occupation introduced forced labor, population displacement, and the establishment of ghettos that confined Jewish families under horrific conditions. Despite these atrocities, Hitler's popularity within Germany initially soared. The rapid military victory reinforced the image of Hitler as a brilliant strategist destined to restore German greatness. Colorized home footage shows jubilant celebrations, soldiers returning briefly to cheering crowds, and newspapers proclaiming German superiority. Many citizens believed the war would be short and decisive, similar to the early campaigns that had expanded the Third Reich. In the spring of 1940, Hitler turned his attention westward. Germany launched invasions of Denmark and Norway, securing vital shipping routes and resources. The campaigns were swift, further strengthening Hitler's reputation for daring military innovation. Soon after, German forces launched a massive assault against Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The strategy once again relied on speed and surprise. Instead of repeating the trench warfare stalemate of World War I, German armored divisions pushed rapidly through the Ardennes forest, bypassing heavily fortified French defenses. The fall of France in June 1940 stunned the world. Paris, one of Europe's most powerful cultural and political capitals, fell to German occupation. Color footage shows German troops marching beneath the Arc de Triomphe while Nazi flags hung from historic buildings. The defeat shattered French morale and marked one of Hitler's greatest triumphs. For many Germans, it seemed as though their nation had avenged the humiliation of World War I. Hitler himself visited Paris shortly after its capture. Rare color footage shows him touring the city's landmarks, including the Eiffel Tower and Napoleon's tomb. The visit lasted only a few hours, but it symbolized the dictator's sense of personal victory. He reportedly described the moment as the fulfillment of one of his greatest dreams. The image of Hitler standing among Europe's cultural treasures reinforced his belief that he was reshaping history according to his vision. With Western Europe largely under German control, Hitler believed Britain would seek peace. However, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill refused to surrender. The conflict shifted to the Skies during the Battle of Britain. German aircraft launched relentless bombing campaigns targeting airfields, radar stations, and major cities. Colorized footage from London reveals buildings engulfed in flames, civilians seeking shelter in underground train stations, and firefighters battling raging infernos during the Blitz. Despite heavy destruction, Britain resisted. The Royal Air Force successfully defended British airspace, marking Hitler's first major military setback. The failure to defeat Britain forced Hitler to postpone plans for invasion. Instead, he turned his attention eastward, where he envisioned the conquest of vast territories that would provide resources and living space for the German Empire. The decision to invade the Soviet Union would become one of Hitler's most catastrophic miscalculations. In June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. Millions of German soldiers advanced across thousands of miles, supported by tanks, aircraft, and artillery. Initially, the invasion achieved staggering success. Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed, and vast regions fell under German control. Color footage from German propaganda units depicts endless columns of prisoners, burning villages, and advancing armored divisions moving across the Russian landscape. However, Hitler's ideological obsession shaped the campaign into a war of extermination rather than purely military conquest. Nazi forces targeted Jewish communities, communist officials, and civilians suspected of resistance. Mass shootings carried out by Einsatzgruppen escalated dramatically. Entire populations were exterminated in forests and fields across Eastern Europe. These actions marked a horrifying escalation toward what would later become the Holocaust. As German forces advanced deeper into Soviet territory, logistical problems and fierce resistance slowed their progress. The vast distances, harsh weather, and determined Soviet counterattacks created enormous challenges. Hitler insisted on continuing the offensive despite warnings from military commanders. His increasing interference in strategic decisions reflected his growing confidence and unwillingness to tolerate dissent. Back in Germany, propaganda continued portraying the war as inevitable and heroic. Color footage from the home front shows factories operating at full capacity, women joining the workforce, and communities participating in patriotic rallies. The regime encouraged citizens to view the conflict as a sacred struggle for national survival. Posters and films depicted German soldiers as defenders of European civilization against alleged threats from Bolshevism and racial enemies. Hitler's personal life during the war remained carefully hidden from the public. He spent increasing amounts of time in military headquarters, particularly the Wolf's Lair, a heavily fortified command complex in East Prussia. Color home movies taken by close associates show Hitler in moments of apparent relaxation, walking with his dog, greeting staff, or reviewing military maps. These scenes were never intended for public viewing, but reveal the dictator's isolation and intense focus on the war effort. By late 1941, Germany faced mounting challenges. The invasion of the Soviet Union stalled as winter approached, and German troops found themselves unprepared for freezing temperatures. Equipment malfunctioned, supply lines stretched dangerously thin, and Soviet forces launched powerful counteroffensives. The myth of German invincibility began to crack, though propaganda continued to portray the campaign as successful. Meanwhile, Hitler's racial policies escalated toward systematic genocide. Nazi leadership initiated plans for the final solution, the coordinated extermination of Europe's Jewish population. Concentration camps evolved into death camps equipped with gas chambers and industrial killing methods. Although these atrocities were largely hidden from the German public, rumors circulated, and evidence of mass deportations became increasingly visible. The regime relied on secrecy, fear, and propaganda to prevent widespread resistance. Hitler's leadership style grew more erratic as the war expanded. He became increasingly distrustful of military advisors and often overruled experienced commanders. His belief in destiny and personal infallibility intensified. Meetings with generals frequently turned into heated confrontations as Hitler insisted on holding territory regardless of strategic cost. These decisions would later contribute significantly to Germany's defeat. Despite growing difficulties, Hitler remained a symbol of authority and hope for many Germans during the early war years. Color footage from public appearances shows crowds still greeting him with enthusiasm, raising their arms in salute as he passed. The cult of personality surrounding Hitler remained powerful, reinforced by constant propaganda and strict suppression of dissent. As 1942 approached, the war expanded into a truly global conflict. Germany's alliance with Italy and Japan created the Axis powers, while the United States joined the Allies after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Hitler now faced a coalition of industrial and military powers far greater than he had originally anticipated. Yet he remained convinced that his leadership and Germany's military strength would secure victory. Part 1 of this documentary traces Adolf Hitler's transformation from failed artist to dictator and wartime leader. It reveals how ideology, propaganda, and military ambition allowed one man to dominate an entire nation and plunge the world into chaos. The colorized images of the Third Reich present a haunting reminder that tyranny often hides behind spectacle, unity, and promises of national rebirth. The story of the dictator is only the beginning. As the war intensified, Hitler's decisions would lead Germany toward both terrifying dominance and catastrophic destruction. The consequences of his rule would reshape the world and leave scars that continue to influence global politics and memory today.